So much for coming today to honor the clinic, because I definitely see I'm a cog in the great wheel of the clinic, but you'd be amazed how many people it takes to make what we do work. We have close to 50 paid employees and at least as many volunteers. We include our board and all the people that do extra things for us. So on any given day when you come in for your visit, it's really taken about 100 people to make everything happen for us to be there. And I would have to just say, as a physician, it's always been sort of interesting for me. People occasionally say, boy, how do you do it? It's such a hard job, and boy, that looks so difficult what you do. And there's part of me that sort of wants to look over my shoulder like, who are you talking to? I've got the best job on the whole planet. All day I get to see my friends and help them with the thing that's bothering them the most right now, or allay their concerns about the future, or give them hope for the future that's real. And I look down the list every day, and everybody on the list that I'm going to see is a friend. And that's what I do every day. So how could anybody call that hard? I'd have to say it was very interesting when we first started. In fact, if I was to say anything about wanting to do, if a young physician came to me and wanted to do a clinic like this, I'd say, remember what Winston Churchill said, never, 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 ever give up. Because that's pretty much what it takes. In fact, you might be surprised by this, but there were probably at least 2 different instances where our whole little board of directors had decided we were really bankrupt and we needed to close. And that was within the last 20 years, where we sort of made that decision, but didn't make it final, and decided we'd come back and make a decision. And we said something would happen that would give us hope that, well, maybe we can keep going. And initially, when we first opened, there was a surprising amount of opposition to what we were doing. I remember the planning department, who was always very upset with the building that we opened in. Of course, being very naive, I just came out of my medical training where you get no business training at all. And suddenly you're faced with having to hire and fire people and keep a checkbook and deal with planning and building departments. And I remember when we rented the place we started in as this old ramshackle building. Literally, it was a storage shed that had a big backhoe in it. And we moved the backhoe out and spent about $10,000 refurbishing the building so it could be a clinic, and pulled in a house trailer right next door. And I thought it was a really nice little rural clinic. I thought it looked beautiful. Well, then the planning department came out and said, well, nothing's up to code, and you can't have clinics in non-commercial areas, and so they gave me a nice big fine. And so we spent our first really 17 years sort of playing tag, literally red tag, with the planning department, with them telling us that we needed to close down because we were illegal, and us making very common sense comments like, there's a lot of people who live out here who need our services. If we weren't here, they'd have to go to town. And they would counter with, well, no one lives out here. And people go to town anyway for everything else, so why shouldn't they go for their medical care? And I still remember there was one fellow, who will go unnamed, from the planning department. His favorite thing was to go around to all the neighbors who lived around the clinic and tell them that I was a criminal and belonged in jail for what I was doing. Unfortunately, he moved on to other things, and so I didn't have to go to jail. Actually, I thought it would be kind of interesting. I was actually thinking in my mind this morning about how many different people have actually worked at our clinic over the last 30 years. Because many people have come through and worked for 5 or 10 years or 15 years and moved on to something else. If you have ever worked at the clinic, even in a volunteer capacity, why don't you put your hand up? I actually calculated it's approaching 500 people have worked at the clinic in 30 years.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? And actually there's a handful of people that have worked there almost the full 30 years. A couple people that are right at the 28-year and 29-year mark. So it always seemed like any time when we were just about ready to close or have to change into something else because we didn't have the right people would show up, an additional provider would show up. When we didn't have any money, I remember the first time I met Dr. Kessler, who you all know, who works with us occasionally, several times a month, occasionally fills in for us too, that I had been on call every night for the first 6 months the clinic was open, and didn't see how I was going to be able to go on much longer. And he just sort of walked into the clinic one day and said, gosh, have you ever thought about having a partner and somebody else working here? And I said, when can you start? And I said, well, I don't have any money to pay. And he said, well, that's not a problem. I'll go work for the Indian Health Service for a month and earn some money, and I'll come back, and then you won't have to pay me very much, or not at all, and I'll just work for free. So that's kind of how that got started. It seemed like every time there was a transition that we had to go through, that somehow it always worked out and we ended up thriving. And it's never been fat and it's never been easy, but it's also made it very fulfilling and very rich, that nothing about it was ever easy, nothing about it was ever straightforward. And I think it's one of the reasons we've ended up doing so many things that were really groundbreaking. You know, our work with integrated behavioral health, where we literally have clinics in Maine call us up and say, how in the world do you do this? We're trying to do this, we've done it for 3 years, and it's a failure. How have you done it? And we get on the phone with all our staff and we talk them through all the different parts of it, and help them learn how to do what we've done. And we did it the hard way. We figured it out ourselves. And I think that's been one of the reasons that it's been so creative what we've done, is there wasn't anybody to ask often, or we were doing such an odd thing that nobody else had ever done it before. So it's given us this great impetus to be creative, to come up with unusual ideas, always with the idea of what's the best for our patients. In the end, our patients are our friends, patients are our family, they're our loved ones. And you know, somebody asked me a few years ago and said, well, gosh, you know, you've just turned 60, so when are you going to retire? And I said, retire? You know, I'm a physician. This is who I am. This is part of who I am. I don't go home at night and take off my doctor's hat and not be a physician anymore. I'm a physician all the time. That's just part of me. And the thought of not being a physician, I wouldn't see that. One of my great mentors, actually a pediatrician, Ron Galster, I'd love if he was here today. He was actually a man in his early 70s who practiced for about 2 years at the clinic as a volunteer. And he'd actually finished his main practice down in Sacramento, retired up here, and suddenly realized he missed seeing patients. And so he just showed up one day at our door and said, could I come see children at your clinic? And I said, when can you start? And he said, today. So, you know, and he just got everything set up, and we suddenly had a pediatric practice, and he saw patients for about 2 years. And then one day he came to see me for his annual physical. We found he had prostate cancer with a very awesomely bad prognosis, very short time to live, and we knew probably about 3 months. And you know, when I sort of finished everything, I said, is there anything we need to do to start transitioning patients off your schedule? Because, you know, I was assuming he wouldn't want to come. And he said, what do you mean? I want to come every day I can come. And I'll still remember it was 2 weeks before he actually passed. He was already in hospice. But he came in as uncomfortable and frail as he was, and saw 3 patients. In fact, the last patient that he saw is one of my goddaughters, Rachel Brink. She was his last patient of his life. And he did a little physical exam on her and was pretty uncomfortable during the whole thing. And at the end, really just sort of had to go home because he was feeling so unwell. And then he passed 2 years later. And I thought, 2 weeks later. And I remember thinking, as I watched him go through that, I said, boy, what a perfect example. This is exactly the way I would see myself do this, is serve to the end. Serve my friends to the end, really be a channel for all that's good in the world, and hope for my friends. And I just want to say I am so grateful to have had really the honor of caring for everyone here all these years. It's been my honor, and I feel like I should give the tribute to you rather than the other way around. So.